Hello there, in just a moment, the press preview as we take a look at the morning papers. But first, our top stories here on Sky News. Tony Blair is facing accusations of trying to undermine British democracy after calling for a cross-party movement to reverse the EU referendum results. Unilever has rejected a takeover by the US food giant Kraft Heinz. The Anglo-Dutch firm said the £112 billion offer undervalued the firm. And the Prime Minister has announced plans to develop new laws to tackle domestic violence and abuse. Hello there, you're watching Sky News and the press preview. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with journalist and author Rachel Shabby and the Deputy Political Editor for the Sunday Express, Camilla Tominey. Let's look at the front pages. The I newspaper investigates into the effects of staff shortages and scant planning are having on the NHS. The Guardian reports on the backlash caused from Tony Blair's comments within the Labour Party. The Financial Times takes a look at consumer goods maker Unilever's rejection to be bought by American conglomerate Kraft Heinz. The Daily Telegraph reports on the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson's reaction to former Prime Minister Tony Blair's Brexit remarks. The Daily Express leads with a poll revealing an increasing number of voters who backed Brexit despite Tony Blair's remarks. The Daily Mail spoke with a shopkeeper who warns rising business rates will turn the UK into a retail wasteland. The Daily Mirror leads with accusations that gambling chiefs were involved in a £2.5 million lottery cover-up. A man who died 27 times in 24 hours tells his story on the cover of The Sun. Inflated prices and economic uncertainty have brought the housing market to a stall, according to the front page of The Times. Well, I'm joined now by journalist and author Rachel Shabby and the Deputy Political Editor for the Sunday Express, Camilla Tominey. And we're going to start with The Guardian first, guys. Tony Blair, he seems to be upsetting a lot of Labour people.
Yes, he's upset among others. He hasn't. Among many, many others.
He's upset so many people today.
So the Labour Party, many of them are not pleased with Tony Blair coming out and saying that the British public should revolt against the Brexit vote, and doing so just ahead of by-elections in both Stoke and Copeland next week, where, you know, in both those constituencies there were strong Leave votes, and Labour is having to work hard to keep hold of both of them. And as one Labour source quoted in this Guardian piece has said, it's the timing of Blair's intervention here does, you know, create the impression that it's actually more about him than about wanting to help the Labour Party.
Do you get the sense that with Tony Blair, it's very much cometh the hour, cometh the man? He feels like he has a duty, he has a responsibility to step up to the mark and say something, even if it's going to upset a lot of people.
Literally, what other reason is there for Tony Blair to do this in light of the by-election next week, apart from for his own self-serving agenda? You know, he must literally think, not only with the comments he's making about Brexit, but just literally must think that the entire electorate are complete idiots. This is just self-aggrandising for his own purposes. I mean, that's a brilliant photograph, actually, to sum up the man's God complex. Equally, it's funny here, in the Guardian piece, it's saying, you know, Corbyn's team had no comment. This is reminding me of the Scottish independence referendum, where the Tories said to David Cameron, you know, just don't go to Scotland. Jeremy Corbyn went to Stoke at the beginning of last week and nobody reported on it. They got him in and out and they just thought, actually, this is going to hamper Labour's chances. And now Tony Blair turns up. You know, if Labour wins Stoke, it will be an absolute miracle. Copeland's probably already gone to the Tories, and they need to seriously start reassessing their position. You know, a lot of the people in Stoke, it might be this notion, I think, that there are certain Labour heartlands where people will automatically vote Labour, even if actually they harbour some quite right-wing views about things like immigration. I think that's slowly ebbing away. And
but actually, the person who destroyed that was Blair.
Well,
you know, the person
yeah.
that was responsible for most of the loss of the traditional working class vote, that mostly happened under Blair's leadership, this kind of idea that people would have nowhere else to go. And that is something that is being tested in these by-elections. I'm more confident of Labour winning Stoke. I can't really see Paul Nuttall and UKIP coming in there. But the thing about this is that there is a conversation to be had about Brexit and the kind of Brexit that we have. And that is a valid and legitimate conversation for us to have as a nation that wants to...
But
he's not the guy.
Yeah.
He's not the man to do it.
So, Camilla, there is a conversation to be had about the Brexits. The Daily Express has got its thoughts on the European Union, and it's telling its readers that they need to get it out of the European Union.
Well, to be fair, this is also the readers telling them and the public through an ICM poll. 68%, I think, regardless of whether they voted Remain or Brexit, are saying, right, we just need to get on with this now. So this whole notion of a revolt doesn't seem appropriate when most people have moved on from the referendum. I know there's lots of people in the media and Westminster bubble still harping on about it. Actually, out on the street, people have got other concerns. Maybe they've got more domestic concerns about matters including the NHS, pay packets, housing, the economy. And there is this notion that actually we need to get on, and this seems really quite regressive from Tony Blair. Yes, let's continue having a debate, because that's what intelligent, mindful people do, even with people that don't agree with them. But not reverse the whole of the referendum and go back to square one, as not only he's been saying, but Clegg, Farron, Nicola Sturgeon, again for self-serving reasons. Farron obviously thinks this is an issue he can campaign and win seats on for the Liberal Democrats, and we all know why Sturgeon's arguing for this, because she wants a second referendum in Scotland. Weirdly, she doesn't want to be ruled by Westminster, but she's happy to be ruled by Brussels. How that makes any sense to anybody with half a brain, God
I think
only
that's
knows.
really unfair to the position in Scotland. I mean, I think Nicola Sturgeon was fine to accept the vote, and the only reason any of this turned is because, Theresa May and her government going down this hard Brexit line, pulling out the single market, doing things that made it impossible for Sturgeon to, represent Scotland and accept. So it was more about that. And
But she's still using its capital for her own agenda.
that is a
It's her own
conversation
agenda.
that needs to happen. That conversation about what kind of Brexit it is does need to happen. Yes, most people do accept that we are leaving because that is the result of the vote. Right, I don't accept this thing about people saying that it was, advisory. It was very, very clear at the time that its results would be binding. That is what the conversation was. That was what politicians said. But there was nothing in that vote to say that we should have the kind of Brexit that the government is now making us have. And that is a conversation, Camilla, that is a conversation that we are not allowed to have.
We're having it. We haven't stopped having it.
Because
we keep on talking about it. Hard Brexit.
Just like now, it keeps being shut down.
No, it's
and
not.
It is a shame.
Shut down, but it's a wrong argument to suggest that people didn't know what they were voting for. The notion of the single market was discussed the whole time during the referendum.
That's exactly the conversation that you're shutting down, because as long as
I'm happy to have the conversation.
Because as long as that
the vote's been
it
passed.
Wasn't on the ballot. Leave the single market was not on the ballot.
It was a simple yes/no that people wanted to.
Right. So to therefore assume that that's what happens.
Rachel, you can't be telling me that the debate in the run-up to the referendum didn't include talk about leaving the single market.
Half of the leavers said we would, half said we wouldn't, and in any case, as you just said, it was not on the ballot. So we have no way of knowing. We have no way of knowing.
Okay, so this is a debate that's going to rumble on this Brexit debate. So we've still got lots more to get through. Let's move on to the Mail page 2. This is a story that we've been covering over the last few days about concerns for Vauxhall staff, concern for their jobs, and that their jobs might actually go elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, this has a bit of Brexit to it as well. But
oh, God.
I know it's kind of
brace yourself.
It's kind of unavoidable. So this is, 3,500 jobs, car workers in Britain that are now going to be perhaps threatened by a takeover of Vauxhall by a French company, PSA Group. They also own or want to, the part of the takeover would include an Opel plant in Germany, which has 19,000 workers. And it seems that Germany has more in play to protect those workers than thus far has been demonstrated by the British government, even though members of the British government, I think the business secretary, one of the business secretaries, went to Paris last week to talk to the PSA group.
I think it was Greg Clark, wasn't it?
Greg Clark.
And Greg also was the one who stepped in over Nissan.
Right. So it's thought that he perhaps was going over there to make a similar style arrangement.
Get some sort of sweetener deal.
Get some sort of sweetener deal. But it does raise this question about, you know, the government's industrial policy post-Brexit. What's going to happen? Is it going to make these sort of deal-by-deal arrangements in the absence of an overall strategy? And it makes you wonder how actually that's going to work, or whether that is going to work.
The government's got to be shown that it is actually doing something, though.
Well, I think people who have voted Brexit, and even if they haven't, are being sold this notion of, you know, let's be the best of British and be a global leader. Companies like Vauxhall are hugely symbolic, and the notion that they could fall out of our hands, and we're getting onto another story about that, is really significant. Let alone the notion of jobs lost in Ellesmere Port or indeed Luton, down the road where I was brought up. You know, Vauxhall's just a part and parcel of growing up, you know, the classic British brand that I think there has to be a sense that the industrial strategy needs to be fairly protectionist of these key symbolic British names that are at the moment facing a threat. So we'll see how it gets on.
It would be incredibly sad to see the jobs go. Let's move on to The Sun, page 6. This is a story about this takeover for Unilever. £115 billion food fight, according to the paper.
Yeah, this is in a similar vein, you know, another much loved, even when it's being hated, Marmite, a brand that, you know, does seem like something that is very popular and which people would feel protectionist around in the UK. It's one of the things made by Unilever, which now is facing a takeover bid, and which, again, you know, it's exactly what Camilla was saying about Vauxhall. It's the same story with a different sector of British manufacturing as to what's going to happen. Will there be a strategy to step in and prevent this takeover, or will it actually fall into the hands of Kraft, which already has a bad reputation from when it took over Cadbury's and then shut down a factory?
And Theresa May said that looking back, she would have tried to have blocked the Cadbury deal. So there's a sense now, well, are you also going to do the same for this? Or you've been reported tonight that actually Unilever are saying, no, that kind of bid isn't in the right ballpark, it's not enough money. But equally, this sense that even though we have the special relationship, there are some brands that we just don't really want the Americans to buy out. And
I mean, they're not saying it's definitely not going to happen either, they're just saying that it's being undervalued.
Yeah, they need more money.
OK, Rachel, Camilla, many thanks for that. We'll have lots more in a few moments' time. Stay with us on Sky News for the press preview. Hello, welcome back to the press preview. Camilla and Rachel are still here with the morning's papers. Camilla, let's talk about the story that's in the Daily Mail. This is a story about rates rise for businesses.
Basically, there's been a massive backlash against these rate rises because they seem to favour some of the bigger stores and not the independent stores that we all want to see remaining on our high street, so they don't become homogenised and all look the same. And this particular shopkeeper up in Monmouthshire, Tom Innes, has written this really hard-hitting letter to David Gauke, who happens to be my MP down in Watford, but is also the Treasury Minister that's pushing forward these changes. And essentially, they're saying that rates need to go up and that shopkeepers are going to have less of an ability to appeal against rate rises, which, understandably, the business community is saying is completely draconian. What I think is interesting about his letter is not only saying, look, this is the final nail in the coffin for the high street. We're already having to compete with Amazon, who, by the way, is being given a tax rebate or break in the face of these rate rises. But equally, you seem to be living in your own world. He says here, it's not scaremongering what we're saying, it's fact. Have you ever got out of the Westminster bubble and come up north to some of the poorer areas which really rely on independent shopkeepers? And I think this just smacks of bonkers policy as far as the Tories are concerned, and just as far as our own post-Brexit economic plan is concerned. It doesn't really seem to fit in with Theresa May's a country that works for everyone, not just the privileged few.
That's the thing, Rachel. You get the sense that this is actually really targeting the little man on the street, which in my point of view, doesn't that go against everything that the Conservative values are all about? The individual, the entrepreneur?
You know, not for the first time. It's the Tory practice not matching Tory rhetoric. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is something that is going to hit independent retailers. It's going to hit SMEs, small businesses, much more and disproportionately than larger companies who, if anything, might be getting a bit of a discount as a result of this reconfiguration. It does seem really galling at a time when, you know, high streets are facing such onslaughts and independent retailers are facing such onslaughts. It's so difficult to survive in a market where, you know, you're being sort of thwarted at every turn by these sort of large corporate giants. And it does seem like another blow. And if it's a question of revenue, then you do wonder about the government's priorities. Wouldn't it be better advised trying to chase after giants that don't seem to pay enough tax?
OK, let's move on to the Daily Mail, page 3. I think, isn't this a story that mums and dads are going to be saying, no, 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 why you should let children play with their food, Camilla?
I know. As the mother of 3 children and an avid wet wipe user, this is not news I want to hear. Children and food, like give them a yoghurt, it's all over the kitchen. My goodness me, I've been there on many occasions. It's funny all this because every year a new eating guideline comes out for kids. I remember a health visitor coming round and saying about my youngest child when she was about 1, oh, you must be giving her finger food, you know, like chopped up carrots. And I remember saying, yeah, that would be great, but she hasn't actually got any teeth. They were like, oh no, because they need to experiment. Anyway, the point is that apparently if you do give them a bit more freedom and you don't mind your entire kitchen being trashed, they might eat vegetables in later life. I actually find that if you disguise vegetables in stuff like chocolate, they'll eat them, but otherwise it's a pretty difficult challenge.
I think there'll be mums and dads who just want their kids to eat sensibly and not cause such a fuss.
Yeah, although, I mean, I do think that I think we're perhaps a little bit over fastidious with the need to use cutlery. I mean, you know, I think using your fingers for food is absolutely fine. And if as a byproduct of that, you know, kids do end up eating the vegetables that they have for the past half hour been pulverising and throwing around.
I suppose it's self-pureeing.
Right.
The hand blender sales are going to go down as we speak.
Yeah.
Let's look at the final story on tonight's press preview. This is in the Sun: spoons full of sugar. Pub chain lists drink calories. Rachel.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think people will be particularly thrilled at the prospect of, you know, going into your pub at the end of a hard day's work and having to be greeted with, you know, how many calories are in your pint of beer or your glass of wine. I'm sure that's not going to be...
Do people really care how many calories are in a pint of beer?
I think women do.
Yeah.
I think women sometimes say, you know, on Weight Watchers, I think a glass of wine is 1 or 2 points, and it's like, oh, shall I forego something else that day because I want to have a drink at night? I mean, I think we have a problem with people drinking too much habitually anyway. Mind you, I say that as a teetotal. I'm a boring, sober person. But I do think, actually, if you did put calories on a menu and that put people off drinking these bucket-sized glasses of wine of a night, which probably clock up a good 1,000 calories if you're going on a Friday night out on the lash.
See, those are the figures. Those are exactly the figures we didn't need to hear.
I know, but like that's the truth of the matter, you know.
It might have
it's
more
quite
of an
calorific.
effect.
It might have an effect.
Than the alcohol content, you're saying.
Maybe. Well, maybe, because I just don't think people are listening to units.
Don't people know that there are a lot of calories in beer and glasses of wine, but after a long week at work, they just want to drink?
I just don't care. Yeah.
I know, but I think that's half the problem, you know, this kind of thing like, oh, it doesn't matter if I finish a bottle of wine every night. Well, yeah, it does. Not just on the fact that you're drinking too much, but that it is calorific, and it's probably contributed to, generally, our waist sizes having gone up over the last 50 years and not down.
OK, Camilla, Rachel, we're out of time, I'm afraid. Many thanks indeed for coming this evening and going through the morning's papers. Let's have a look at what the weather's got in store for us.